At my dad's birthday dinner, he lifted his glass, smiled like a king, and said, "Only the children who made me proud are truly mine." The room erupted laughter, applause, flashing cameras. And then he turned his head, looked straight at me, and said, "You can leave." For a second I couldn't breathe. My chair scraped against the marble as I stood. Every eye followed me. Shame burned down my spine. But then my husband rose too. Calm, steady. And what he did next didn't just stop the room. It split my entire life in two. My name is Nova Vale, and this is the moment my father erased me in front of 200 people, and the moment my husband revealed a truth that none of us were ready for. Before I share my story, I want to know you're here with me. Just say, listening in the comments, or tell me where you are. I love seeing how far my story reaches. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now, here's my story. And if my voice feels familiar, or if you've ever been dismissed by someone you loved, please subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know. Before I tell you about the night my father told me I could leave his life, I need to take you back to an ordinary afternoon in my classroom, the only place where I ever felt truly enough. It was raining the way it always seems to in Seattle, a soft mist tapping against the windows of 4B at Silver Creek Elementary. The glass had fogged over from 28 fourth graders breathing, laughing, arguing about who got which color marker. On my desk sat a leaning tower of notebooks, a couple packs of brand new crayons I'd bought on sale, and a box of chalk I'd paid for myself because the district had better budget priorities. I'd just wrapped up our last lesson and given my students a simple group activity. Pick a topic you care about and convince the class, I told them. They took it more seriously than most adults I know. One group was passionately defending why recess should be longer. Another insisted cats were superior to dogs until someone brought up allergies and chaos broke loose. When the dismissal bell finally rang, the room dissolved into that familiar storm of zippers, backpacks, and last-minute questions. A few kids lingered. Maya ran up with a drawing of me standing in front of a chalkboard, a crooked heart around my head. "You're the best teacher in the whole world," she said like it was the most obvious fact. Behind her, Jonah handed me a folded note. Inside, in shaky pencil, he'd written, "Thank you for helping me read." Those words hit harder than any award ever had. I felt warmth bloom in my chest, the kind I only got here among glue sticks and spelling lists. But underneath it, there was that old sting, the knowledge that these tiny, priceless victories meant nothing in the currency my father dealt in. My name is Nova Vale. I'm 27, a fourth-grade teacher in a public school in Seattle, and the daughter of a man the local news likes to call the father of Washington's future. To the world, he's Dr. Maxwell Carrington, Superintendent of Education for the entire state. To me, he's the shadow I've never quite stepped out of. Growing up, my life was measured in charts and report cards, in potential and wasted opportunities. My dad loved numbers, SAT scores, college acceptance rates, graduation percentages. If something couldn't go into a graph, he didn't consider it real. I remember him missing my college graduation because he had to speak at a fundraising gala. I remember him laughing in front of my aunts and uncles when someone asked my salary. "She's basically volunteering," he joked. "But hey, she likes kids." The room laughed with him. I smiled like it didn't hurt. It did. My stepmother Marielle didn't help. Before she married my father, she'd hosted a fashion segment on local TV. She knew cameras, angles, lighting, and she applied all of that to our family. After she moved into the Carrington estate, everything had to look a certain way. Dinners became photo ops. Vacations became content. She treated our last name like a brand she needed to protect. In her curated version of the Carringtons, I was always the smudge on the lens. "You're sweet," she once told me, eyes scanning my thrift store dress. "But you don't exactly fit the image we're trying to build." Her daughter Aurelia fit it perfectly. Harvard Law, Stanton and Granger LLP. Corporate clients marble lobby tailored suits. At every party, every holiday, my father would introduce her as the one who will carry on my work at the highest levels. Then he'd gesture vaguely toward me and say, "And that's Nova, she teaches elementary school. She loves kids." I started to feel like the family's quirky side note, the also starring in a story where I was supposed to be a main character. The only place I didn't feel like a disappointment was in my little apartment overlooking Lake Union with Orion. When we met in grad school, me in education, him supposedly in some vague tech field, he drove an old sedan, wore hoodies, and listened more than he spoke. He showed up with coffee when I was drowning in lesson plans. He proofread my papers not because he cared about education theory, but because he cared about me. After we got married, our life was small, but warm. Secondhand furniture, mismatched mugs Sunday mornings with pancakes and papers graded at the kitchen table. Whenever I apologized for the stacks of worksheets, he'd just smile and say, "The world starts in rooms like yours. Don't ever forget that." He worked a lot late-night calls from his team spreadsheets and reports open on his laptop, but when I asked, he brushed it off. Just a small project, he'd say. Nothing exciting. I didn't push. Part of me was afraid that if I started measuring him the way my father measured me, I'd poison the one safe place I had. One gray afternoon after the kids left and the rain picked up, I drove home through the slick Seattle streets, exhausted in that bone-deep way only teachers understand. When I walked into the apartment, the first thing I saw was an envelope on the table, heavy cream paper gold embossing Carrington Estate. My stomach tightened. I wiped my hands on my jeans before I opened it. Inside was a thick, glossy invitation. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the 63rd birthday of Dr. Maxwell Carrington, honoring his lifetime contributions to education." Under that, in bold, was a line that made my heart trip: "Special segment unveiling the future direction of the Carrington Future Scholars Fund." I read it twice, then a third time. I knew that fund. 2 years earlier, over a rare, quiet drink in his study, my father had mentioned it. "One day, this scholarship program will shape who leads schools, districts, entire systems," he'd said. "It'll need people who understand real education. If you learn to think bigger than that little classroom of yours, I might consider you for a role." I'd taken that crumb and turned it into a feast of hope. I started attending workshops on teacher leadership, spending weekends drafting proposals for mentoring programs, reading research on burnout and retention. I imagined sitting at a conference table one day, guiding decisions that would actually help teachers like me. My dad never brought it up again. Now here it was in print, unveiling the future direction of the fund. My pulse sped up. Maybe, just maybe, this was his way of finally bringing me in. "What's that look?" Orion asked, coming out of the kitchen with 2 plates of reheated leftovers. I handed him the invitation. He read it carefully, jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. So he said, setting it down, "Big night." "Yeah," I exhaled. Big night. Hope and dread twisted together in my chest. "Do you think he'll mention me?" The fun that conversation we had. Orion studied me for a long moment. "Are you ready for whatever happens?" he asked quietly. "I mean, really ready. All possibilities." I frowned. "You're making it sound dramatic." "It's just a birthday party." I tried to laugh, but it came out thin. I picked up the card again, and that's when I noticed it. Nova plus spouse. Not Nova Carrington Vale. Not Ms. Nova Vale, Teacher of the Year, Silver Creek Elementary. Just Nova plus spouse. An accessory. An afterthought. I swallowed the sting and told myself I was being sensitive. It's just formatting, I thought. Just a line on an invitation. I told myself, just get through the night. Maybe this time will be different. Looking back now, I wish I'd listened to the knot in my stomach instead of the voice trying to calm it. Because of course I was wrong. A few days before my father's birthday, I stood in front of my open closet like it was a test I hadn't studied for. Hangers clicked against each other as I flipped through my options. Thrifted floral, plain black, a couple of cardigans that had seen too many parent-teacher conferences. Nothing screamed daughter of the man of the hour. Most of it barely whispered presentable. I pulled out the navy dress I'd worn 3 years earlier when the district gave me the Teacher of the Year award. It wasn't designer. The zipper stuck sometimes. But when I'd worn it on that stage in front of my colleagues and my principal and 20 kids waving homemade signs, I'd felt proud. Not because of the dress, but because the little plaque in my hand meant I was doing something right. I held the dress up against myself in the mirror, trying to imagine how it would look under hotel ballroom lights instead of fluorescent cafeteria bulbs. Maybe I thought he'll remember. Maybe he'll see me in this and think of that award of my speech about kids who finally learned to read about the way their eyes lit up. Deep down, another voice whispered that he probably hadn't even read the email announcing it. Orion leaned against the doorway watching me. "You look beautiful," he said, like it was an objective fact. "I haven't even put it on yet," I muttered. "Doesn't matter," he shrugged. "You'd look good in a trash bag." I rolled my eyes, but a smile tugged at my mouth. Then he added more softly, "You don't need anything extra to be worthy of that room, Nova. Don't let them make you forget that." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But every time I pictured the ballroom, I saw my father's measuring gaze, the subtle comparisons, the way his mouth always lifted higher when someone said Harvard than when someone said public school. His standards were a staircase I never seemed interested in climbing, and he never forgave me for that. As I zipped the dress, a memory rose up uninvited. Another gala years ago in another ballroom, with another theme about the future of education. I'd hovered at the edge of a circle of donors while my father held court. "This is Aurelia," he'd said, hand on my stepsister's shoulder. "Harvard Law. She's going to take what we're doing in education to the next level, policy, legislation, big picture work." People had nodded, impressed. Then he'd sort of gestured in my direction. "And that's Nova. She teaches elementary school, loves the kids." A man with a name tag that screamed foundation money turned to me with polite interest. "So what's next for you, Nova?" I'd brightened, eager. "I want to keep teaching, then maybe move into mentoring new teachers, helping with training." "Ah," he'd said, already turning back to Aurelia. "Very hands-on." "And you, Aurelia, what's the timeline for partnership at your firm?" The conversation flowed away, and I stood there smiling into my drink, learning in real time how small my dreams looked to people who only understood power in titles and income brackets. After that night, I stopped volunteering information about my work. If someone asked, I kept it vague. "Oh, you know, busy with the kids." Another memory followed close behind this one, quieter. Just my father and me in his study at the Carrington estate, the smell of leather and old books thick in the air. He'd poured us each a drink, something smoky and expensive I pretended to like, and started talking about the Carrington Future Scholars Fund. "This won't just be scholarships, Nova," he'd said, eyes bright. "It'll be leadership pipelines. We'll identify the brightest minds, fast-track them into positions of influence. The people who sit on that board will shape who runs schools, who sets policy, who decides which voices matter." I'd felt a flicker of hope. People who've actually been in the classroom should have a say, I'd offered. Teachers know what's broken before anyone else does. He'd looked at me, then really looked, and for a second I saw the dad. I used to imagine a man who might be proud of a daughter who knew kids' names more than politicians' names. "If you learn to think bigger than that little classroom of yours," he'd said, "I might consider you for a role one day." The words "think bigger" lodged in me like a thorn. I understood what he meant. Leave teaching, come work in his world, play the game he respected. But I translated it into something else. I started reading research on teacher burnout, drafting proposals for mentoring programs, sketching out ideas for how the fund could actually support classrooms, not just resumes. I waited for him to ask what I was working on. He never did. The night before the birthday gala, we had dinner at the estate. The table was long and gleaming, the kind of table where conversations travel in waves, and someone always gets left out. Marielle spent 10 minutes recounting how Aurelia had just closed a multi-million-dollar deal. Our girl was in a room full of men twice her age and she still owned it, she said, eyes shining. My father's laugh was loud and proud. That's what I'm talking about, he said. That's a Carrington. When there was finally a pause, I tried to slip my own story in. One of my students, I began, he could barely sound out words in September. Yesterday he read an entire page out loud. You should have seen his face when he finished. The table went quiet for a beat. Forks paused. Then someone asked Aurelia about her next case, and the current swept on. I sat back, the words I hadn't said heavy in my throat. A few minutes later, my father turned to me with a frown that was almost curious. Nova, he said, you're still at that public school, right? Silver Creek, I asked. Yeah. He swirled the wine in his glass. Have you thought about finding something more appropriate to your potential? Something more on our level? I felt Orion's eyes on me from across the table. Appropriate according to whose standards? I asked, keeping my voice even. Yours or mine? My father shrugged like it was a trivial distinction. Standards are standards, he said, and took another sip. Through all of this, Orion was quieter than usual. He listened more than he spoke, watching like he was gathering data. When my father mentioned the fund and its generous corporate partner Lumenrise, he chuckled. As long as the money keeps flowing, he said, who sits on the board is a Carrington decision. A flash of something crossed Orion's face. Annoyance, recognition. For the first time since I'd known him, I saw his jaw tighten at the mention of a company name. His eyes lingered on the embossed Lumenrise logo at the bottom of the menu, and there was a flicker there like he was recognizing an old photograph in a new frame. At the time, I filed it away as one more strange moment in an already uncomfortable night. Later, I'd replay it and understand it for what it really was, the first crack where the truth started to shine through. That night, back at our apartment, we stood on the balcony watching the city lights shimmer on Lake Union, rain drifting down like static. I wrapped my arms around myself. I'm scared, I admitted. Not of the party. Of being invisible again. Of sitting there while he pretends I'm just someone who loves kids and nothing else. Orion leaned on the railing close enough that our shoulders touched. If he doesn't see you, he said, that doesn't make you invisible. It just means his vision is limited. I let out a shaky laugh. Do you think I'm selfish? I asked. For still wanting him to be proud of me, even though he obviously doesn't respect what I do. He was quiet for a moment. I think you're human, he said. We all want our parents to see us. But maybe the question isn't, will he ever be proud? Maybe it's, whose approval actually defines you? His or yours? I stared at the dark water, at the reflection of a city that never really slept. Easy to say, I murmured. Harder to live. You're right, he said. Which is why some people have to be forced to look at what they've ignored. Even if it's messy. There was something in his tone, a promise maybe, or a plan that I didn't know how to read. I was too tired to dissect it. I went to bed with my mind split neatly in half one side, rehearsing small talk and polite smiles, the other bracing for the familiar sting of being overlooked. I told myself it was just a birthday dinner, just one night. I had no idea that by the time that night was over, every relationship in my life would be cracked open, and the man I thought I knew best, my husband, would show me a version of himself I'd never seen before. The Emerald Crown Hotel looked like somewhere my life did not belong. Crystal chandeliers dripped from a ceiling 3 stories high, throwing light over a red carpet lined with reporters' cameras and people in dresses that probably cost more than my car. Massive banners hung from the walls, my father's face airbrushed and smiling above the words, celebrating 63 years of Maxwell Carrington, a legacy in education. I stood just inside the entrance, clutching my clutch a little too tight, feeling less like a daughter and more like an extra who had wandered onto someone else's movie set. Orion's hand pressed lightly against my back. "Breathe," he murmured. "You're okay." I nodded, even though I wasn't sure I believed him. We didn't get more than 10 steps in before Marielle glided toward us, sequins catching the light like she'd been born under a spotlight. Her eyes flicked over me, then landed on Orion. "Well," she said, lips curving, "at least your husband is handsome. A little understated for tonight, but we can work with that." It sounded like a compliment until the last part. "This room is full of very important people, dear," she added, turning to me. "Remember to behave accordingly." Before I could respond, Aurelia appeared at her side in a red dress that seemed designed to be the brightest thing in the room. "Nova," she sang, leaning in for a hug that barely brushed my shoulders. "You still teaching 4th grade?" Her smile sharpened. "That's cute?" She didn't wait for my answer before launching into a recap of the monster case she was about to win, tossing out words like injunction and precedent for the benefit of anyone within earshot. I smiled, nodded in the right places, and felt each casual jab settle under my skin. None of their comments drew blood on their own, but stacked together they felt like bruises. When they drifted off to greet a group of donors, Orion squeezed my fingers. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just remembering why I avoid these things." A hostess led us toward the ballroom where a large seating chart stood on an easel by the doors. Names were written in looping gold script grouped neatly around table numbers. I scanned it, heart thumping. Table 1, Maxwell Carrington, Marielle Carrington, Aurelia, Fontaine, Elias Ramirez, plus a handful of CEOs and a state senator. I traced down the list, searching for my own name. I found it near the bottom next to a small 21. Table 21 was not near the stage. It was near the doors tucked by the service area where waiters were already slipping in and out with trays. "Excuse me," I said to the hostess, my voice tighter than I meant it to be. "I think there's a mistake. I'm Dr. Carrington's daughter." She checked the chart, then the tablet in her hand, frowning. "This is what we have, ma'am," she said gently. "The seating was approved by Mrs. Carrington." The words hit harder than they should have. This wasn't a glitch. It was intentional. We stepped into the ballroom, music pouring over us, clinking glasses and polished laughter filling the air. My father was already working the room, shaking hands, clapping shoulders, posing for photos under his own face. When he finally spotted me, he didn't rush over or open his arms. He just lifted his chin slightly. "You made it," he said, when we reached him like we were acquaintances he hadn't been sure would show. "Of course," I replied. "It's your birthday." I hesitated, then added, "I thought maybe tonight." He cut me off with a practiced smile. "Let's not complicate things for the planners, Nova. Your table is full of teachers. You'll have plenty to talk about." In my head the words screamed, "I am a teacher, but I am also your daughter." Out loud, I said nothing. Table 21 was a cluster of round faces, nervous smiles, and stiff jackets that didn't quite fit right. I recognized a few teachers from district trainings. One older woman lit up when she saw me. "Nova, I had your father as a teacher in high school," she said. "What are you doing back here with us?" The question wasn't cruel. It was bewildered. I laughed it off. "I guess we're the fun table," I said, even as embarrassment pooled in my stomach. Orion sat so close our shoulders touched his hand, finding mine under the table steady and warm, the only solid thing in a room built on performance. When the MC finally tapped the microphone, the lights dimmed and a spotlight swept toward the stage. My father strode up to the podium to a wave of applause. Cameras flashed. Screens on either side of the stage lit up with photos of him cutting ribbons, shaking hands with governors, standing with groups of smiling students. He started with his usual story, a young idealist teacher, working long hours believing education could change lives. The room laughed at the right moments, murmured approval when he hit his familiar lines about equity and access. Then he moved to the thank yous. "My beautiful wife, Marielle," he said, gesturing toward the front table, "who has brought our family into a new era. The way she presents our work to the world, the image she keeps so carefully, it's invaluable." Applause. Marielle dabbed at an imaginary tear. "And Aurelia," he continued, "who shows us what true ambition looks like. Harvard Law, Stanton and Granger taking the fight for better education into the courts and the boardrooms. She is everything we hope our students can become." More applause. Aurelia stood waving modestly red dress catching every beam of light. At table 21, I sat very still. Every time he said proud, a muscle in my chest clenched, bracing, hoping, knowing better. He didn't mention the daughter who spent 60 hours a week teaching kids to read, who bought notebooks and snacks with her own paycheck, who had an award tucked into a desk drawer at school because she'd never found the right moment to show him. "Family," he said then, lifting his glass slightly, "is the reason we do any of this. It's what keeps us moving forward." He paused, surveying the room, letting the sentiment settle. "I've always believed one thing: only the children who make me proud are truly mine." The room reacted like he'd delivered a clever line. Laughter, a few whistles, a smattering of applause. To most of them, it was just a sound bite. To me, it felt like a loaded weapon. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew him well enough to hear the edge beneath the joke. Then his gaze shifted. He looked past the VIP table, through the pools of light, all the way to where we sat by the doors. Our eyes met. "And those who can't or won't reach that level," he went on lightly, "if they feel they don't belong in this space." He let the sentence hang for a second, the room leaning in. "They're free to leave." The silence that followed was thick, heavy, stretching over the clink of ice in a glass and the distant hum of the air conditioning. Then, with a small, almost kind smile, he added, "Nova, if you're uncomfortable, you can go home." For a moment, the floor seemed to tilt. My ears rang. I was aware of everything and nothing at once: the weight of my dress, the coolness of Orion's hand, the way my throat closed around air that suddenly felt hard to swallow. He hadn't just seated me at the back. He'd erased me from the family in front of 200 witnesses. Around us, people shifted awkwardly. Some stole glances at me, then away. A few smiled tightly like they were watching good television. At the front, Marielle covered her mouth with her fingers and whispered to her neighbor, "He's always been so blunt." Aurelia looked over her shoulder and gave a little shrug, as if to say, "What did you expect?" Heat crawled up my neck, flooding my face. The sound of my chair scraping back on the polished floor seemed impossibly loud as I pushed it away from the table and stood. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just knew I could not sit there another second under the weight of those eyes, the knowledge that if I stayed, I was silently agreeing with him. If I left, I was proving his point that I didn't belong. Caught between humiliation and suffocation, I chose the only thing I could. I got to my feet. As I turned, fingers shaking around the strap of my purse, another chair scraped back beside me. Orion stood up at the exact same moment. His hand closed around mine, firm and sure. Across the room, I saw Marielle lift her hand, a subtle signal. Two security guards near the doors straightened and began moving toward table 21. "Don't," I whispered to Orion, my voice barely working. "Please don't make this worse." He didn't look at me. His eyes were locked on the stage, on my father. He gave my hand a small squeeze, then let go just enough to step forward. "If my wife has to leave," he said, his voice carrying farther than I thought possible without a microphone, "then before we go, I have one question for you, Dr. Carrington." The room snapped to attention. The MC froze halfway to the podium. Conversations died mid-sentence. It wasn't sympathy that filled the silence. It was curiosity, the kind people have when they sense something big is about to happen. The guards kept coming, not running, but with the kind of deliberate pace that said they believed they were in control. I grabbed Orion's fingers again. Seriously, I hissed, let's just walk out. He shook his head once. No, he said quietly, not yet. Then louder to the stage. Do you actually know who the primary sponsor of the Carrington Future Scholars Fund is? My father's brows drew together, more offended than confused. He was a man used to being asked for advice, not answers. As long as their money arrives on schedule, he replied into the mic, his tone edged with amusement. The details are a Carrington matter. A murmur rippled through the tables. It wasn't what he said so much as how he said it, like the sponsor was a faceless account, not a partner. From where I stood, I saw Elias Ramirez, the man I knew chaired the fund's board, lift his glass halfway to his lips and pause. His other hand slipped into his jacket, pulling out his phone. The screen lit his face, and I watched his expression shift from mild interest to something very close to alarm. My own pulse spiked. I had no idea what was happening, only that I could feel the ground of the evening shifting. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Orion glance down at his phone, thumb moving quickly over the screen. A second later, Elias's phone buzzed again. He stared at whatever just came through, then abruptly pushed back his chair at the VIP table and stood. Leaning toward my father, he spoke low but urgently. We need to talk. Now. There's a serious problem. My father kept his smile pinned in place, but his jaw tensed. This isn't the time, he said, lips barely moving. We'll handle it after the program. If you wait, Elias replied, a touch louder, you may not have a program to finish. The microphones on stage picked up the edge in his voice, sending it out over the speakers. The ballroom shifted again, chairs creaking as people turned to look at Elias, then at my father, then back at us at the far table. Before my father could respond, Aurelia rose from her seat. This is a family event, she said, projecting like she was addressing a jury. A private celebration. You don't get to hijack it with whatever this is. Her eyes flicked to Orion with open disdain. Nova, take your husband and go before this gets more embarrassing. The word husband felt less like a label and more like a line she was drawing, us and them, insiders and outsiders. The way she said go sliced through me. I'd been called many things in this family, but outsider was the one that hurt the most, because it felt true. Orion didn't flinch. He stepped away from our table, moving past the approaching guards like they were pieces of furniture. There was nothing aggressive in his posture, but there was something unyielding. The men in black hesitated, glancing toward the stage for instruction. Before Marielle could snap her fingers again, Elias lifted his hand. Let him speak, he called. His voice had the authority of someone used to making decisions about large sums of money. That carried more weight here than any family title. My father's face had gone from flushed to mottled. Still, he clung to his composure as Orion climbed the few steps to the stage and came to stand a careful distance from the podium. Cameras turned. Phones lifted higher. I could feel my heart in my throat as I made myself follow him, not wanting to watch from the sidelines, while my life spun off its axis. Up close, my father looked older than he had under the forgiving light of his photos. The lines around his mouth had deepened in the last half hour. He leaned slightly toward the microphone. And who exactly do you think you are? He asked, voice tight. Walking up here and questioning me at my own event? Orion didn't reach for the mic. He waited, and the MC reading the room stepped back and held it out to him without being asked. Orion took it and let the silence stretch just long enough to make everyone lean in. I'm just someone asking the right question at the right time, he said finally. His voice, amplified now, was calm, but carried an undercurrent I'd never heard before. And it seems to me that the right time is the moment a man decides to publicly discard his own daughter in front of 200 people. A low sound moved through the crowd, part gasp, part approval. My father bristled. That's enough, he snapped. You've made your point. Leave. Orion shook his head slightly. I don't think the point has been made yet, he said. So let me put it another way. Do you know who Lumenrise Learning Systems actually is? My father waved a hand dismissive. Some tech company, he said. It doesn't matter. You're right. Orion answered, eyes steady on him. To you, it doesn't matter. They're just numbers on a spreadsheet. But to me? He paused, and I felt the air change. It matters a lot. My heart skipped. I stared at his profile, at the lines I'd traced with my fingers in the dark, at the man I shared a bed and a life with. Suddenly, he felt unfamiliar, like a stranger wearing my husband's face. Behind us, Elias stepped closer to the podium. Dr. Carrington, he said, voice more formal. Now, I suggest you listen to what he has to say. There's something you don't know about tonight. Marielle had gone pale beneath her makeup. She grabbed the back of her chair, knuckles whitened. Her eyes shot to me, sharp and frightened. Nova, she hissed, who is your husband? I stood there on that stage, caught between the father who had just pushed me out of his story and the husband I was realizing I might not fully know. And in that suspended moment, with every eye in the ballroom fixed on us, I understood that whatever came out of Orion's mouth next wasn't just going to change the tone of a party. It was going to detonate the version of my life I'd been living for the past 5 years. The lights seemed to narrow until they were all pouring down on Orion. My father watched him with the anticipation of a man about to crush an annoyance. Marielle leaned forward, hungry to see us escorted out. Aurelia's jaw was set, ready to pounce. And me, I stood beside my husband, feeling like the floor had tilted, not sure what I was standing on anymore. Orion lifted the microphone. His voice was steady. My full name, he said, is Orion Vale Kingsley. The reaction was small at first. A few heads tilted. A couple of people exchanged quick looks. Then someone near the front actually said, Kingsley, from EdTech. Voices rose in low waves. The name meant something to them, even if it hadn't fully landed on me yet. I'm the founder and CEO of Lumenrise Learning Systems. Orion continued, the primary sponsor of the Carrington Future Scholars Fund. For a heartbeat, there was no sound at all. The entire ballroom held its breath. Then noise crashed in all at once. Gasps, whispers, the frantic tapping of phone screens. Reporters shifted to get a better angle. From where I stood, it felt like someone had ripped my life down the middle. I was still touching his sleeve, but I had no idea who I was touching anymore. My father broke first. That's impossible, he shouted, stepping closer. You're just ordinary. I checked your background. You're nobody. Orion's mouth tightened, but his tone stayed calm. You checked what I allowed you to see, he said. You saw a salary, an apartment, an old car. You assumed that was the whole story. That assumption is on you. The room buzzed. Every arrogant choice my father had made that night was suddenly framed in something larger, and everyone knew it. Orion glanced at me then, and for a moment it was just us. I didn't tell Nova because I didn't want her to marry a resume, he said into the mic. I didn't want her dragged into photo ops or used as proof that I care about schools. I wanted her to be able to love her students and her work without anyone questioning if she'd earned it or if I'd handed it to her. Eyes shifted toward me, curious, softer, guilt-ridden in some cases. People who'd smiled past me earlier now looked at me like I was something fragile and strong at the same time. Then Orion pulled a folder from inside his jacket. This, he said, is the funding agreement between Lumenrise and the Carrington Future Scholars Fund. He opened it, pages rustling into the microphone. Section 4. Board seats must be held by individuals with frontline educational experience. Section 6. No board appointment may be announced without written sponsor approval. Section 7. No nepotism in leadership assignments. And Section 9, any public disparagement of public school teachers must be reported and reviewed. My father snatched at the papers. You're twisting this, he snapped. This is all a misunderstanding. Nova was never right for this. She doesn't fit what I've built. She has no ambition. Marielle's voice cut across his. "We are tired of explaining to people that she's just an elementary school teacher," she said, too loud, too raw. "Do you know how that sounds at our level?" The entire room reacted. People sat back, disgust plain on their faces. Someone near the back said, "Wow," under their breath. Another murmured, "Did she really just say that?" In that moment, something shut off in me. Not a light. Those had been flickering for years. More like a door. Whatever tiny hope I'd been keeping for my father to wake up and see me as more than a disappointment. Closed. Elias stepped up beside us, no longer trying to stay in the background. "I can confirm," he said clearly, "that this is our CEO, and that Dr. Carrington has violated nearly every core clause in that agreement." My father pointed at Orion, voice hoarse. "You can't blow up my life over some technicality. This is my legacy. I built all of this." Orion looked from him to me, then back again. "Your legacy is how you treat the people you claim to serve," he said quietly, then louder for everyone to hear. "And you just gave me every reason to believe this fund can't stay in your hands. So tonight I'm exercising my rights under that contract." My father's eyes flashed. "What are you talking about?" "I'm starting the process to pull our funding," Orion said. "Effective now." The ballroom erupted into motion again. Board members were yanking out their phones. Reporters were practically climbing over chairs, and Aurelia had gone pale, fingers flying over her screen, as she no doubt realized the seat she'd just been promised might have just been turned into a liability. And standing in the center of all of it, I had this wild thought. I'd thought the worst thing that could happen tonight was my father cutting me out. I had been very, very wrong. After those words left Orion's mouth, the room changed from a party to a storm. People stood up, half from shock, half from instinct, like they needed to move to believe what was happening. Conversations spiked and broke. Phones were held high to film someone called a newsroom from their seat. The same guests who hadn't bothered to look twice at me before were now staring openly, like they were trying to read my face for clues. My father tried to seize back control. He stepped in front of the microphone, yanking it toward himself. "Everyone calm down," he said, forcing a laugh that sounded brittle. "This is a private misunderstanding. Families fight. We will resolve this." His voice skipped on the last word. No one sat back down. I saw a producer from the local station near the back gesture to a cameraman. A red light blinked on. The entire meltdown was going out live. "Dr. Carrington," a reporter called, standing phone in hand, "did you or did you not just say, 'Only the children who make me proud are truly mine'?" Before he could answer, the giant screens flanking the stage flickered. Someone had already pulled the clip from the live feed. There he was, larger than life, raising his glass with that easy smile. We all watched him hear his own voice. "Only the children who made me proud are truly mine." Then turning toward the back of the room, "Nova, if you're uncomfortable, you can go home." My stomach twisted. It was one thing to live that moment once. It was another to watch it projected with the whole city watching with me. On stage, the real Maxwell went rigid. His face blanched, then flushed a dangerous red. His hand on the mic shook. "That was taken out of context," he barked. "You're sensationalizing a joke." Orion moved closer to the microphone again, his presence beside my father almost painfully calm. "You're proud of the children who extend your brand," he said. "But there's one question you've never once asked your daughter." He looked at my father, not away from him. "Have you ever asked her if she's happy?" The quiet that fell then was different, heavy and thick. Nobody shuffled or coughed. It was as if the entire room wanted to hear the answer. My father opened his mouth, then closed it again. No sound came out. Elias stepped forward, clearing his throat. As chair of the fund's board, he announced, "I'm resigning effective immediately." That alone sent another ripple through the room. "And I'm calling for an emergency vote to remove Dr. Carrington from leadership of the fund." "You have no authority," my father snapped. This fund is my name. The bylaws give us that authority, Elias replied. And your own behavior tonight guarantees we have to use it. From my spot on the stage, it felt like watching a building I'd grown up in start to crumble brick by brick. And yet beneath the shock there was a strange, guilty sense of relief. For once, consequences weren't skipping over him to land on everyone else. Marielle couldn't stay quiet. "This is ridiculous," she shouted to anyone who would listen. "The fund will go on with or without some tech company's money. We have reputation. We have stature." A man in an expensive suit near the front turned to her. "Reputation doesn't replace integrity," he said bluntly. "And donors don't like the word nepotism attached to their causes." Aurelia was on her phone, voice low and urgent. "I understand," she said. "Yes, I saw the live stream. We can spin this. We just need a statement." She went quiet for a second, then, "You're reevaluating." "Because of tonight?" Her face drained of color. I watched them, the three people who had spent years looking down on my choices, suddenly scrambling to hold together the image they'd built on dismissing them. It didn't feel good exactly. It just felt true. Orion returned to the contract in his hand. "There's one more clause you might have missed," he said. "Section 10. If the leader of the fund publicly disrespects public education and its teachers, the sponsor reserves the right to withdraw all funding without penalty." He lifted his gaze to the crowd. "So in front of all of you, I'm invoking that clause. Lumenrise is pulling the full $7 million we've provided over the last 3 years." The collective sound that followed was almost physical, a sharp intake of breath from 200 throats. My father's knees seemed to give. He dropped into a chair as if the strings holding him up had been cut. For the first time that night, he looked small. I stepped toward the microphone, my own hand surprisingly steady. My voice sounded strange to my ears, stronger than I felt. "Dad," I said, and the word tasted different now. "I've spent years trying to be visible to you. Years trying to show you that what I do matters. But if the only thing you want to see is your reflection in other people's success, there's nothing left for me to prove." Saying it out loud into a microphone in front of all those people snapped something inside me into place. I wasn't asking for his validation anymore. I was stating a fact. When Orion and I turned to leave the stage, a figure peeled away from the crowd. A woman in her 60s, gray hair pulled back, eyes bright with something like sorrow and fury combined. She stepped right up to the foot of the stage, voice clear even without amplification. "Maxwell," she called, looking up at my father. "It wasn't your daughter who cost you all this. It was the way you forgot the value of the job that made you who you are." People around her nodded. Some clapped quietly at first, then louder. I looked at my father one last time. He was staring at the floor, shoulders bowed, as the world he'd curated so carefully shifted under his feet. That sentence from his former teacher hung in the air as Orion led me down the steps and toward the exit. It felt like the final line of a story I'd been stuck in for too long. What I didn't know yet as we walked out of that glittering hotel into the cold Seattle night was that it was also the opening scene of another one. The story of tearing my life down to its foundation and rebuilding it on something that was finally mine. By morning, my phone had become an alarm I couldn't silence. Messages stacked on top of each other faster than I could swipe them away. Emails from colleagues, texts from old classmates, DMs from strangers, and notifications from every social platform I'd ever created an account for. The video of my father dismissing me at his birthday gala had climbed to the #1 trending spot in Seattle overnight. Someone had clipped the moment he told me I could leave and slowed it down, adding captions and analysis as if it were a political scandal or a courtroom breakdown. But among the noise, there were messages that felt like warm hands on my shoulders. "Thank you for standing up," one teacher wrote. "You spoke for all of us," a parent said. "You didn't deserve what he did," a woman I'd never met messaged. I'd become a symbol without meaning to. And symbols I knew could either be used or be consumed. Reporters left voicemails requesting interviews. Morning shows wanted me as a guest. A documentary channel wanted exclusive rights to the Carrington education fallout. Orion sat beside me at the kitchen table, coffee in his hands, letting me read everything at my pace. "Do you want to speak publicly?" he asked softly. I shook my head. "I don't want to turn my family's damage into a spectacle," I said. "But maybe I can turn it into something useful." Before I could decide what that meant, my work life was dragged in. By noon, my principal called, sounding breathless. "Nova, the media is at the school gate," she said. "Parents have gathered. They want to see you." My heart sank. The last thing I wanted was to disrupt the place I loved most. I expected whispers, judgment, polite distance. Instead, when I stepped onto the school grounds, dozens of children sprinted toward me. They hugged my legs, tugged my hands, shouted Miss Vale as if I'd been gone for years instead of one night. Behind them, parents stood in a row clapping. I froze, overwhelmed. One mother stepped forward. "You taught my daughter to read," she said. "No title in the world tops that." And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. My value had never been decided in a ballroom filled with donors and chandeliers. It was here in chalk dust and laughter, in small victories and growing minds. Then an SUV pulled up near the gate. My father stepped out wearing a suit so wrinkled it looked slept in. His hair, always perfectly combed, was out of place. He spotted me and hurried over. "We need to talk," he said. "We can fix this, Nova. We just need a united front." The parents stiffened. Cameras whispered like insects nearby. "Not here," I replied. "If you want to talk, it will be in private." Inside the empty conference room, he paced. "I didn't think you'd react like that last night," he said, frustration and fear mixed unevenly in his voice. "No," I said quietly. "You didn't think I was someone who had the right to react." He stopped pacing. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "People don't have to mean it to do it," I answered. "Harm is still harm." His phone buzzed. He glanced down. On the screen I saw Marielle's name. A preview of her text read, "If you don't fix this funding disaster, Aurelia and I are leaving." He looked up at me with panic behind his eyes. Even now, even with his life unraveling, his fear was not for losing me, it was for losing the image. "I'm not going to fix anything for you," I said. "You built this. You can take responsibility for it." "You could help," he insisted. "Talk to Orion. Ask him to reconsider." "No," I replied. "The only thing I'll ask for is this: apologize publicly to every teacher in this state. Not to polish your reputation, to acknowledge what you broke." His refusal was instant. "I won't humiliate myself." "Then this conversation is over." I stood feeling lighter than I expected. Leaving him in that room wasn't revenge, it was release. For the first time, I wasn't the one carrying the weight of his disappointment. He was. On the drive home, rain streaking across the windshield, Orion reached for my hand. "You think this is the end?" he asked, reading my silence. "Isn't it?" I said. He shook his head. "It's the beginning. I have something for you. A gift. Something no one can take away." I turned to him, confused. "What kind of gift?" "One that gives you back everything they tried to take." I didn't know what he meant. But I felt with a certainty that almost scared me that whatever came next would change more than my name or my story. It would change my future. 2 days later, he brought me to the headquarters of Lumenrise. I'd seen it in pictures, sleek glass steel beams, sun cutting through the lobby like a cathedral, but walking through the doors beside Orion felt like stepping into another version of the world. People nodded at him with respect I hadn't understood before. Some whispered his name, some whispered mine. He led me to a large conference room. When the doors opened, a digital screen flickered on with a title: Nova Vale Initiative, supporting public school teachers of Seattle. I froze. Tears blurred the words before I could fully read them. "What is this?" I whispered. Orion stood beside me, not proud, just steady. Public school teachers are the ones building the future, he said. They deserve more than applause when it's convenient. They deserve resources, protection, and recognition. I built this for you, not because you're my wife, but because you embody the heart of what education should be. The initiative was already funded $10 million from Lumen Rise. 5 other major edtech companies had sent letters committing partnership. Thousands of teachers had signed messages of support within hours of the announcement draft being sent privately through the network. My throat closed. Why me? I asked. Because you're the proof, he said, that the best work in education doesn't happen in ballrooms. It happens in classrooms. Before I could answer, my phone rang. My father. For a split second, I considered ignoring it, but I answered. We met in a quiet cafe near the water. He looked smaller than before, like the world had finally caught up to him. Nova, he said, voice low, I was wrong. I know that now, but I don't know if there's anything left to fix. I didn't feel anger anymore, just the tired ache of a wound no longer bleeding. I believe you're sorry, I said softly. But I'm not here to rebuild your life for you. I'm not here to step back into the roles that broke me. He nodded, eyes glassy. For the first time in my life, I saw him cry. And for the first time, I didn't feel responsible for those tears. I forgive you, I said. But I can't go back to living in your shadow. Leaving him there felt like closing a door gently instead of slamming it. A chapter ended without chaos, just clarity. Weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. I told Orion in our kitchen, the morning light falling across his face, as if the world itself wanted to soften the moment. He held me for a long time, whispering into my hair, "Our child will grow up knowing kindness matters more than prestige, and they will never doubt their worth." Despite the meetings, despite the foundation, despite everything that had changed, I kept teaching. People asked why, as if managing a multi-million-dollar initiative should replace the joy of a classroom. But my joy was never the money, or the authority, or the victory. It was the kids who came in every day, ready to learn, ready to grow. Sometimes, after school, I would think about that night, the one where my father told me to leave. And I realized something that took years to understand. That night wasn't the moment he cut me out. It was the moment I stepped out. I'm Nova Vale. I'm no longer the daughter waiting to be claimed. I am who I choose to be. And I finally belong to myself.